The air inside the massive studio was heavy, hanging thick with a mixture of heat and anxiety. It was the kind of tension that makes your neck muscles tight and your hands feel clammy, even if you are just standing on the sidelines. The day had already been long, stretching on for hours past the schedule, and everyone was feeling the weight of it. Bright, blinding lights beat down from the rigging above, creating artificial daylight that seemed to make every shadow disappear. In the center of this chaos, the focus of the entire room was a large, beautiful German shepherd. He was a magnificent animal, with a coat of sleek black and tan fur that shone under the lights, but right now, he wasn't looking majestic. He was looking like a cornered wild animal. The crew members were holding their breath. The cameraman, a veteran who usually focused on the lens with a steady hand, was glancing nervously over his shoulder. The sound technician was frozen with his boom pole in the air, afraid that even the slightest creak of his shoes might set off the ticking time bomb in front of them. The scene they were trying to film was supposed to be simple. It required the dog to sit still and look at a door, waiting for his cue. But the German shepherd was having none of it. His ears were pressed flat against his skull, and his lips were curled back to reveal white, sharp teeth. A low, rumbling growl was vibrating in his chest, a sound that seemed to silence the entire studio. This dog, usually a well-trained professional who knew his commands better than most people knew their own names, had completely shut down. The environment was just too much for him. The loud noise of the generators, the strange reflections on the polished floor, and the sheer number of people staring at him had overwhelmed his senses. He wasn't being aggressive out of hate, he was acting out of pure, unfiltered fear. He had backed himself into a corner of the set, squeezing his large body behind some fake furniture, his eyes darting wildly around the room. Every time a member of the crew moved, the dog would snap his jaws and let out a bark that echoed through the building, warning everyone to stay back. The professional animal handlers were the first to try and fix the situation. They were experts, people who had worked with dangerous animals for decades. They approached the dog with confidence, holding leashes and using firm, loud voices. They tried to take control of the space, believing that if they showed dominance, the dog would submit. One handler stepped forward, clicking his tongue and giving a sharp command. But instead of listening, the German shepherd panicked. He lunged forward, snapping at the air just inches from the handler's hand. The handler jumped back, stumbling over a cable, his face pale. It was a scare that sent a fresh wave of fear through the room. The tension only got worse from there. The director, a man known for his short temper when things ran late, was pacing back and forth near the monitors. He was wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, looking at his watch every 30 seconds. Every minute that passed cost thousands of dollars, and the scene was nowhere near done. He started barking orders at the crew, asking what was taking so long, demanding that someone do something. The crew, already on edge, started moving faster and more erratically. This rush of energy only made the dog more anxious. The noise level rose, the lights flickered, and the German shepherd began to pant heavily, his eyes wide with terror. He was no longer just growling, he was barking continuously, a loud, piercing sound that made it impossible to hear anyone talk. People were starting to give up. You could see it in their body language. Production assistants were huddled by the exits, looking for a way out if the dog broke loose. The makeup artist was clutching her bag to her chest, ready to run. The atmosphere had turned from professional to dangerous. There was a real concern that the dog might bite someone, or that the shoot would have to be cancelled for the day, ruining the entire schedule. The experts were out of ideas. They tried treats, waving pieces of meat and cheese in front of the dog's nose, but the animal was too stressed to eat. They tried soft whining noises to comfort him, but the dog only heard them as another strange sound in a loud room. He was trapped, and he knew it. Amidst all this panic and noise, Keanu Reeves was standing quietly off to the side. He was wearing his costume for the scene, a simple outfit that looked lived-in and comfortable. He had been watching the whole ordeal unfold with a calm, focused expression. While everyone else was rushing around, shouting or looking scared, Keanu stood still. He didn't check his watch. He didn't yell at the crew. He didn't look annoyed. He just watched the dog. He noticed the small details that the others were missing in their panic. He saw how the dog's paws were slipping on the shiny floor, unable to find grip. He saw the way the dog's eyes weren't looking at the people, but at the shadows moving on the walls. He understood that the dog wasn't angry, he was just scared and confused. Keanu stayed near the edge of the set, leaning against a wooden beam, observing the chaos. He saw the handlers trying to force the dog to obey, and he saw the dog's reaction get worse every time they raised their voices. He saw the director losing his patience, acting like a general in a war zone, which only made the energy in the room more aggressive. It was a cycle of fear. The dog was afraid of the noise, the people were afraid of the dog, and the noise was getting louder because people were rushing. The German Shepherd let out a particularly sharp bark, followed by a lunge that sent a prop table crashing to the floor. The sound of the smash was like a gunshot in the studio. Everyone froze. The director threw his hands up in the air and shouted that the dog had to go, that they would cut the scene or use a CGI double. The handlers looked defeated, hanging their heads, grabbing their leashes and preparing to drag the animal off the set. It looked like it was over. The failure hung in the air, heavy and disappointing. It seemed impossible that the scene would be shot today. The mood was sour, filled with the feeling of defeat and wasted time. But Keanu didn't move away. He pushed himself off the beam and took a slow, deep breath. He looked at the dog, who was now trembling behind the overturned table, and made a decision. He didn't care about the schedule or the money or the director's anger. He only cared about the animal. He could feel the stress radiating off the dog, and he knew that the only way to fix it wasn't with force or commands, but with something completely different. The room was loud, the people were frantic, and the situation was spiraling out of control, but Keanu was about to step into the storm with a different kind of energy. He wasn't looking at the dog as a prop or a tool for the movie, he was looking at him as a living, breathing creature who needed help. The clock on the wall seemed to be moving faster than normal, ticking away the seconds with a loud, rhythmic sound that only added to the pressure in the room. In the film industry, time is the most expensive thing you can buy, and right now, a lot of money was being burned up every minute the scene wasn't finished. The director was pacing back and forth, his shoes squeaking on the polished floor, looking at the monitor and then at the dog, his face getting redder with frustration. The crew was tired, the light was fading, and the mood in the studio had shifted from professional annoyance to genuine concern. Everyone just wanted to go home, but the German Shepherd was standing in the way of that happening. The head animal trainer, a man who usually carried himself with the confidence of someone who commands beasts for a living, decided it was time to get serious. He motioned for the other handlers to step back, creating a circle around the dog. He believed that the issue was a lack of respect. In his mind, the dog was challenging his authority, and he needed to show the animal who was in charge. He pulled out a thick, sturdy leash and approached the corner where the shepherd was hiding. The air in the room grew still as everyone watched. The crew members stopped fidgeting with their equipment, and the cameraman lowered his cameras slightly, all eyes fixed on the standoff. The trainer spoke in a loud, booming voice, using short, sharp commands that were meant to cut through the noise and grab the dog's attention. He walked with a stiff posture, making direct eye contact, which in the human world shows confidence but in the dog world is often seen as a threat. The German Shepherd didn't see a leader, he saw a predator coming to get him. The dog's fear spiked instantly. He stopped panting and went completely still for a second, his muscles locking up. Then, as the trainer reached out to snap the leash onto the collar, the dog exploded into action. He didn't bite to attack, he bit to defend. He lunged at the leather leash, snapping his jaws with incredible speed, barely missing the trainer's hand. The trainer jumped back, tripping over a light stand and barely catching his balance. A gasp went through the room. It was a scary moment. If that bite had connected, it would have been a serious injury. The dog immediately retreated back to his corner, panting harder than ever, his eyes darting around wildly. He was trembling now, his tail tucked so far between his legs it was touching his belly. The trainer's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. He tried again, this time waving a bag of treats, trying to lure the dog out with the smell of dried meat. But the dog was too far gone. His instinct to survive had taken over, and food meant nothing to him when he felt trapped. The failure of the head trainer seemed to break the dam. Everyone else started offering advice, shouting over each other. Someone suggested using a blanket to cover the dog's eyes to calm him down. Another person suggested bringing in a female dog to distract him. People were running around, grabbing equipment, making noise, and generally adding to the chaos. The German Shepherd was overwhelmed by the sensory overload. The shouting, the movement, the stress in the air, it was all too much. He began to bark again, a repetitive, frantic sound that felt like he was screaming for help. It was heartbreaking to watch such a noble animal reduced to a state of pure panic. The director finally snapped. He yelled cut, even though they weren't rolling, and stormed over to the group. He started arguing with the trainer, waving his arms and pointing at the dog. He was talking about animal wranglers and unprofessionalism, but his anger was just making the situation worse. Dogs are incredibly sensitive to human emotions, and they can feel the energy of a room better than people can. This room was filled with anger, impatience, and fear. The dog was acting like a mirror, reflecting all that negative energy right back at them. The more the humans panicked, the more the dog panicked. It was a vicious cycle that nobody seemed able to break. Standing quietly apart from the madness was Keanu Reeves. He hadn't moved from his spot against the wall. He watched the trainer try to force the dog, and he watched the dog's terrified reaction. He saw the director losing his temper, and he saw the crew looking at each other with worried eyes. Keanu knew that this wasn't a training problem. You can't train a dog out of fear by scaring him more. He understood that the dog wasn't being bad. The dog was just a living creature that was having a terrible day and didn't know how to cope with the strange, loud world he had been brought into. Keanu felt a strong pull to help. He didn't care about the movie scene anymore. He didn't care about the money or the schedule. He just saw an animal that was suffering. He noticed that whenever the trainers approached with aggression, the dog's hackles, the hairs on his back stood up straight. But whenever someone moved slowly or quietly, the dog's ears would perk up slightly, listening. It was a small sign, but Keanu caught it. He realized that the dog wasn't responding to commands because he was in survival mode. His brain was flooded with adrenaline, and he literally couldn't process the orders being shouted at him. The only thing that would work was patience and calm. While the argument continued on the other side of the set, Keanu slowly pushed himself off the wall. He didn't make a big announcement. He didn't call for silence. He just started walking. He didn't walk toward the dog in a straight line, which can look like a predator charging. Instead, he walked in a soft arc, keeping his body turned slightly sideways. This is a technique that shows respect to a dog, signaling that he isn't a threat. The lighting technician nearby saw him moving and opened his mouth to warn him, probably thinking the actor was about to get bitten, but Keanu gently shook his head, telling the man to stay quiet. The noise of the argument was still loud, but Keanu was creating a bubble of calm around himself. He wasn't wearing his actor mask. He wasn't performing. He was just being himself, a person who loves animals and understands them. He could see the dog watching him. The shepherd's eyes were locked onto Keanu's movements. The dog was confused. Every other human in the room was moving fast and shouting, but this one human was moving slowly and silently. The curiosity in the dog's mind was starting to fight against the fear. Keanu could see the tail give a tiny, hesitant wag, just an inch or so, but it was there. The head trainer and the director were still distracted, arguing about whether to call the vet or cancel the shot. They had mentally checked out, accepting that the situation was a failure. They had decided that the dog was unworkable for the day. But Keanu wasn't ready to give up. He stopped about 10 feet away from the dog. He didn't look the dog in the eye, because staring is a challenge. Instead, he looked at the floor, making himself small and harmless. He slowly lowered his body, crouching down so he wasn't towering over the animal. It was a posture of peace. The studio lights were hot, and the air conditioner was humming loudly, but in that small space between Keanu and the dog, everything felt quiet. The German shepherd stopped barking. He was panting rapidly, his nose working overtime, smelling the air. He was trying to figure out who this person was. Keanu stayed perfectly still, breathing slowly, projecting a feeling of safety. He wasn't thinking about the script or the cameras, he was thinking about how lonely and scared that dog must feel in the corner. It was this genuine empathy that the dog sensed. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a technique. It was just a real connection forming in the middle of a chaotic movie set. The experts had failed because they tried to control the dog, but Keanu was about to succeed because he simply wanted to understand him. The moment Keanu Reeves stepped away from the safety of the wall, the energy in the massive studio shifted instantly. It wasn't a loud change, but rather a sudden, sharp intake of breath from the 30 or so people standing on the sidelines. To the crew, it looked like a slow-motion scene from an action movie where the hero walks toward the explosion, but in this case, the explosion was a terrified, 90-pound German shepherd. The dog was still pressed into the corner, his back against the fake wall, panting so hard his whole ribcage was heaving up and down. He looked dangerous. He looked unpredictable. To everyone else, going near him was a mistake that would end in a hospital visit. Keanu, however, didn't see a threat. He moved with a deliberateness that was mesmerizing. He didn't walk with the bouncy, hurried step of someone who is late or anxious. He planted his feet softly on the concrete floor, rolling from heel to toe, making almost no sound. He was dressed in his street clothes, a simple jacket and jeans, looking more like a regular guy than a millionaire movie star. His hands were loose by his sides, not clenched into fists, and his shoulders were dropped and relaxed. Every single movement he made was calculated to broadcast one message: I am not a threat. The head animal trainer saw Keanu moving out of the corner of his eye. The man's face went pale, and he immediately turned his body to intercept him. "Mr. Reeves, no!" the trainer shouted, his voice cracking with panic. He stepped forward, waving his hands frantically. "Don't go in there. He's in a red zone. He will bite you. Please, step back." A few crew members flinched at the shouting, expecting the dog to lunge again. But Keanu didn't even blink. He didn't turn his head to look at the trainer. He didn't apologize or explain himself. He simply held up one hand, palm open toward the trainer in a universal signal for stop or wait. It was a polite gesture, but it was also incredibly firm. He was asking for trust, and he was asking for space. The trainer froze, confused and horrified, but he didn't physically try to stop him. He just watched, along with everyone else, as the actor continued to walk toward the snapping jaws of the dog. As Keanu got closer, the German Shepherd's reaction was intense. The dog's ears swiveled forward, locking onto Keanu's position. The growling started again, low and rumbling, vibrating through the floorboards. The dog's body was tense, coiled like a spring. He was preparing to defend himself. If Keanu made one wrong move, ran too fast, shouted, or stared him down, the dog would attack. It was a dangerous gamble, and the audience of crew members felt the tension in their own chests, their hearts beating faster. When Keanu was about 6 feet away from the dog, just outside the range where the dog could easily snap at him, he stopped completely. He didn't advance another inch. He stood there for a long moment, letting the dog get used to his presence. He didn't stare into the dog's eyes, which a dog sees as a challenge. Instead, he looked at the dog's chest, focusing on the movement of his breathing. He was acknowledging the dog's fear without confronting it. He was showing the animal that he wasn't interested in a fight. Then, Keanu did something that shocked everyone in the room. He didn't try to tower over the dog to show dominance. He didn't stand his ground like a statue. Instead, he began to lower his body. He moved slowly, bending his knees, sliding his back down the wall until he was seated on the floor. He crossed his legs in front of him, making himself look as small as possible. He looked like a kid waiting for a school bus, not a man dealing with a vicious animal. From his position on the floor, Keanu was now below the dog's eye level. This is a vulnerable position for a human. It puts you in a place where you can't run away quickly, and it exposes your neck and face. In the animal kingdom, lowering yourself is a sign of respect and submission. It tells the other creature, I am not trying to be the boss here. You are safe. The German Shepherd stopped growling abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. The dog's eyes went wide with confusion. He had been expecting a fight, or a chase, but this human had just sat down. The dog's tail, which had been tucked tightly between his legs, twitched slightly. He took a small step forward, then stopped. He was sniffing the air, trying to smell Keanu's intent. Keanu stayed perfectly still. He kept his head turned slightly away, looking at a spot on the floor a few feet to the left of the dog. He was actively ignoring the dog, which is a powerful social signal. It takes the pressure off. It tells the dog, you don't have to react to me right now. We can just be here. The director, who had been yelling moments ago, was now standing with his mouth open. He had his hand raised to give a command, but he forgot what he was going to say. The cameraman had zoomed in slightly, capturing the moment on the monitor, but nobody was looking at the screen. Every pair of eyes in the studio was fixed on the man and the dog on the floor. It was a standoff, but a gentle one. Keanu began to speak, but his voice was so soft that the people standing 5 feet away couldn't hear what he was saying. It wasn't a command like sit or stay. He wasn't ordering the dog to do anything. He was just making noise, a low, soothing humming sound. Occasionally, he would whisper a word, just a gentle sound of reassurance. It was the kind of voice you use to talk to a baby who is crying in the middle of the night. It was a voice that carried no anger, no impatience, and no fear. It was the sound of pure safety. The German Shepherd took another step closer. His nose was working overtime, processing Keanu's scent. He smelled the dust on the clothes, the coffee from earlier, but mostly, he smelled calmness. Animals are experts at reading chemical signals. When humans are afraid, they release adrenaline and cortisol, which dogs can smell instantly. But Keanu's heart rate was steady. His breathing was slow and deep. He wasn't holding his breath in anticipation of a bite. He was just sitting there, relaxed as if he was on a park bench. The dog couldn't smell fear on him, only a strange, steady patience. Slowly, the dog's posture began to change. The muscles in his back, which had been rock hard with tension, started to soften. His ears, which had been pinned flat against his head in aggression, slowly began to lift up and rotate forward. He was listening now, not just defending. He was curious. He leaned his head forward, stretching his neck to sniff Keanu's knee. Keanu didn't move. He didn't reach out to pet the dog. He knew that reaching out too soon could be seen as a trap. He just let the dog investigate him on the dog's own terms. This was the turning point. For the last hour, everyone had been trying to make the dog do something. They wanted him to sit, to stay, to calm down. They were forcing their will on him. But Keanu was doing the opposite. He was giving the dog a choice. He was waiting for the dog to decide. He was treating the dog like an equal. The German Shepherd seemed to understand this shift. He realized that this human wasn't going to hurt him, and he wasn't going to force him to do anything scary. The immediate danger that the dog felt evaporated, replaced by a cautious interest. The dog let out a long breath through his nose, a loud huffing sound that blew a small cloud of dust across the floor. He sat down on his haunches, right in front of Keanu, but still just out of reach. He was no longer looking for an escape route. He was looking at Keanu with a gaze that was intense and focused. The vicious animal was gone, replaced by an intelligent, observant dog who was trying to figure out who this quiet man was. The tension in the room began to dissolve, replaced by a sense of awe. The crew watched silently, realizing that they were witnessing something special, a masterclass in empathy from a man who was known for his kindness, both on and off the screen. The silence that settled over the studio was heavy, but it wasn't the same suffocating silence from before. This was different. This was a quiet filled with anticipation. Everyone in the room, from the director standing by the monitors to the lighting crew perched high up on the scaffolds, was holding their breath. It felt like time had stopped. The only movement in the entire massive space was the dust motes dancing in the beams of light and the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of Keanu's chest. Keanu stayed seated on the floor with his legs crossed. He was perfectly relaxed, looking like he was waiting for a friend to arrive for coffee. He kept his eyes lowered, respecting the dog's space, letting the animal make the next move. He knew that trust isn't taken, it is given. He couldn't force the dog to like him. He had to wait. The German Shepherd was watching him with intense focus. The dog's head was tilted slightly to the side, a universal sign of curiosity in animals. His ears were perked up, swiveling like radar dishes, catching every soft sound Keanu made. The dog was still confused. Every human he had interacted with today had been loud, fast, and demanding. But this human was still, quiet, and patient. The dog's brain was trying to process this new information. He sniffed the air again, his long, black nose twitching as he analyzed Keanu's scent. There was no adrenaline smell, no sweat of fear. Just a calm, steady energy. Slowly, the dog decided to take a risk. He lowered his front end, keeping his rear up in a classic play bow position, though it was hesitant. He crept forward 1 inch, then 2. His claws clicked softly on the hard floor. He stopped and looked at Keanu, waiting to see if the man would move. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He just kept breathing slowly. Finally, the dog was close enough. He stretched his neck out, his nose hovering just inches from Keanu's knee. He took a long, deep sniff, smelling the denim of Keanu's jeans. Then, with a tail wag that was small at first but quickly grew in confidence, he took the final step. He pressed his wet nose against Keanu's hand. A quiet murmur rippled through the crew, but Keanu didn't react to the crowd. He kept his focus entirely on the dog. He didn't snatch his hand away to pet the dog roughly. He let his hand rest there, passive and open, allowing the dog to claim him. The dog rubbed his cheek against Keanu's fingers, marking him with his scent. It was a moment of acceptance. The dog was saying, "You are okay. You are safe." Keanu slowly turned his hand over, palm up, and very gently scratched the dog under the chin. It was a spot that dogs love, a spot that makes them feel safe and loved. The German shepherd's eyes closed halfway, and a low sound rumbled in his chest. It wasn't a growl this time, it was a low, happy groan of relief. The tension that had been locking the dog's muscles for the last hour melted away like ice in the sun. He leaned his heavy body into Keanu's legs, seeking more of that comforting touch. The transformation was breathtaking. Only seconds ago, this animal was a vicious beast that everyone was afraid of. Now, he was leaning against Keanu like a puppy who had just found his favorite person. The dog's tail was wagging so hard it was thumping against Keanu's leg, creating a soft drum beat in the quiet room. Keanu smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached his eyes. He spoke again, still whispering, telling the dog what a good boy he was, praising him for being brave. The head animal trainer was standing nearby, his mouth practically hanging open. He looked at his clipboard, then at the dog, then back at Keanu. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He had tried every professional technique he knew, spent thousands of dollars on equipment and training, and none of it had worked. Yet here was an actor, with no leash and no treats, calming the dog with nothing but patience and kindness. It was a humble moment for the trainer, a realization that sometimes you don't need to be an expert to connect, you just need to care. Keanu shifted his position slightly, opening his arms just a little. The dog didn't hesitate. He shuffled forward and actually climbed halfway onto Keanu's lap. This was a massive dog, a strong working breed, but right now he was acting like a baby. He buried his head in Keanu's chest, hiding his eyes from the bright lights and the staring people. Keanu wrapped one arm around the dog's shoulders, hugging him close. He shielded the dog's eyes with his hand, creating a dark, safe little cave for him. It was such a simple gesture, covering the dog's eyes to block out the scary world, but it meant everything to the animal. The dog let out a long, deep sigh and went limp in Keanu's arms. He was done fighting. He was done being scared. He had found a protector. The connection between the man and the dog was undeniable. It wasn't acting. It wasn't a trick for the cameras. It was a real bond forming in that dusty corner of a movie set. The crew watched, many of them smiling, some wiping away a tear because the scene was so touching. It reminded everyone that despite the technology, the lights, and the cameras, the most powerful moments are the simple human ones, or in this case, the moments between a human and an animal. The director, seeing the change, slowly walked over. He was moving carefully, not wanting to break the spell. He looked at Keanu, who looked up but kept his arm around the dog. The director didn't shout. He didn't give orders. He just looked at the animal, who was now looking up at Keanu with adoring eyes, and whispered, "Can we shoot?" Keanu looked down at the dog, scratching him gently behind the ears. The dog looked back at him, ready to follow him anywhere. Keanu nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said softly, his voice calm. "He's ready." The dog, sensing that Keanu was happy, let out a happy bark and stood up, shaking his body from head to toe. He wasn't the stressed-out shepherd from before. He was a professional actor again, but this time, he had a reason to perform. He wasn't doing it for a treat or because he was forced to. He was doing it for his new friend. He stood by Keanu's side, alert and focused, waiting for the next command, his tail gently wagging back and forth. The nightmare on the set was over, replaced by a heartwarming story that everyone there would never forget. Keanu stood up slowly, the dog pressing against his leg, and together, they walked toward the set, leaving the fear and chaos behind them. As Keanu stood up from the floor, the entire atmosphere of the studio seemed to shift along with him. The heavy, suffocating blanket of tension that had covered the room for hours suddenly lifted, replaced by a feeling of quiet hope. The German shepherd, who had been a trembling ball of fear just moments ago, was now standing confidently by Keanu's side. His tail was wagging in a steady, rhythmic thump against Keanu's leg, and his ears were perked up in a friendly, alert way. It was hard to believe this was the same animal that had been snarling and snapping at everyone else. The transformation was complete, and it hadn't required a choke chain or a harsh word. It had only required a little bit of patience and a lot of heart. Keanu didn't rush toward the set. He moved at an easy, slow pace, and the dog matched his step perfectly. They looked like two old friends taking a walk in the park, completely ignoring the bright lights and the expensive equipment around them. The crew members watched in silence as they walked past. People stepped aside, not out of fear this time, but out of respect. It was as if they were witnessing a sacred procession. The cameraman, who had been ready to pack up his gear and go home, was now adjusting his lens with a huge grin on his face. The lighting technician was wiping a smudge off his reflector, moving slowly and quietly so he wouldn't disturb the dog. Everyone understood that the mood had changed, and they were careful not to break the spell that Keanu had cast. When they reached the mark on the floor where the scene was supposed to begin, the director leaned in close to his monitor. He didn't shout action, like he usually did. Instead, he whispered a quick instruction to the script supervisor, who nodded and gave a thumbs up to Keanu. Keanu looked down at the dog and spoke a few soft words. He didn't give a military-style command. He just said something like, "You ready, buddy, let's go to work." The dog looked up at him, his eyes bright and focused, and let out a soft bark that sounded like an agreement. The scene called for the dog to walk across the room, sit by a specific chair, and wait for Keanu to approach him. Earlier, this simple task had been impossible because the dog was too scared to move from the corner. But now, with Keanu standing in the center of the room, the dog had an anchor. He knew he was safe. As the cameras began to roll, Keanu gave a small hand signal. The German Shepherd trotted across the polished floor with his head held high. He didn't slip. He didn't get distracted by the shadows. He walked straight to the chair, turned around perfectly, and sat down. He looked straight at Keanu, his tail sweeping the floor once, waiting for his next cue. Keanu began to walk toward him for the scene. The crew held their breath, waiting to see if the dog would panic again as Keanu got closer. But the dog didn't move. He sat like a statue, his eyes locked on Keanu's face with absolute trust. He knew Keanu wasn't going to hurt him. He knew that as long as this man was near, nothing bad could happen. It was a powerful moment to watch. The connection between them was visible even through the camera lens. It wasn't just acting, it was a genuine bond of friendship and respect. "Cut. That's a print," the director shouted, though he kept his voice relatively low. The word hung in the air for a second before the crew erupted into cheers. It wasn't a loud, rowdy celebration, but a collective sigh of relief and happiness. People started clapping, some gave thumbs up, and the lighting guy high-fived a grip. They had done it. They had captured the shot in one take, something that rarely happens with difficult animal scenes. The frustration and the stress of the day melted away, replaced by the satisfaction of a job well done. Keanu didn't immediately celebrate, though. He knew the work wasn't over for the dog. He walked over to the shepherd and immediately dropped to his knees again, hugging the dog around the neck and praising him. "Good boy," he said loudly, scratching the dog's favorite spot behind the ears. "You did it. You were amazing." The dog barked happily, his tail wagging so hard his whole back end was shaking. He soaked up the affection, leaning into Keanu's chest. To the dog, the scene was just a fun game he played with his friend, and he was happy to see his friend so pleased. The handlers approached slowly, looking a bit sheepish. They had been ready to give up, and they felt a little embarrassed that an actor had succeeded where they had failed. But Keanu didn't gloat or make them feel bad. He stood up and shook the head trainer's hand, treating him with the same respect he treated the dog. "He's a great dog," Keanu said, his voice sincere. He was just overwhelmed. He just needed to feel safe. The trainer nodded, his face flushed. He learned a valuable lesson that day, one that he would carry with him for the rest of his career. He realized that sometimes, you have to stop trying to control an animal and start trying to understand them. As the crew began to pack up the equipment, the mood on the set remained light-hearted. People were chatting and laughing, the bad vibes from earlier completely gone. Keanu stayed with the dog for a while longer, playing with him and giving him treats. He made sure that the dog's last memory of the studio was a happy one, filled with praise and love, not fear. He petted the dog's head one last time, promised to see him again, and then finally turned to head back to his trailer. The story of what happened on that set spread quickly. It wasn't just a story about a movie star, it was a story about empathy. The crew members told their friends, who told their friends. It became a legend in the industry, a reminder that kindness is often more powerful than force. Everyone who was there that day walked away feeling a little bit inspired. They saw how a little bit of patience could turn a disaster into a triumph. Keanu Reeves walked out of the studio with his hands in his pockets, looking like nothing special had happened. He didn't want an award or a round of applause. He was just happy that the dog was okay and that they got the shot. But for everyone watching, it was a masterclass in humanity. In a world that is often loud, aggressive, and rushed, Keanu showed that sometimes the best way to handle a difficult situation is to stop moving, Stop shouting, and simply offer a hand. The German Shepherd had been scared, but he wasn't bad. And Keanu wasn't just a movie star, he was a human being who took the time to care. And in the end, that made all the difference in the world.